Welcome to the MSJC Internet Authoring Videocast.
Welcome to CSIS 113B Lecture 10, covering JTextFields, JButtons, and events. So here's what we'll be covering in this lecture. We'll talk about the JButton class, JButton events, which you'll have to implement an ActionListener interface to be able to capture events that are going on in your GUI and then handle them. Several steps involved there, so adding the event listener or the action listener for your buttons. Once you've implemented the interface, then you're going to need to create methods that, based on particular type of event that occurs, you'll have some code written in your methods that will handle that. And then also we need to add the action listeners, or just generically speaking, the event listeners to our objects. So the example 3 there is whatever the JButton is that we created and named, we use the dot notation there. So the name of the button, dot, and then add action listener. So that's the specific listener type, the specific interface. And then we use in the parentheses, the keyword this to refer to the class that we are building all of this in, which is our GUI interface. We'll also be taking a look at the JTextField class. You'll be introduced to its getText method. So if you think about a form, when you're inputting data into a form, you're adding those text values, you're typing those into an input. And so in Java, it's referred to as a JTextField class. So we'll need to be able to get the data that's being typed into the class by the user, and so we use the getText method. And then you'll see that there's also some wrapper classes to convert the JTextField text, because it may be numeric values that they're typing in there, but everything comes in as a text, as a data type of text, and so it'll need to be converted. And then we will have mouse events that we'll want to detect from time to time as well, and so we have a couple of different interfaces there, the Mouse Listener and the Mouse MotionListener. So the JButton class is the class that we use to add buttons into our GUI interface, and you'll create a JButton object just like you do the other objects that you previously have done. So you'll identify the type as JButton, give it a name, an example here, button, and then assign it an instance of a new JButton. And in the case of the JButton, you can actually pass text to it that will be the text that displays on the button itself. So that example in red there is just creating a new JButton, and it has the text "click me" on it. Now a JButton generates events. So these events then get generated based on what we click on within the interface, which button you click on. When we're looking at JButtons, right, those are clickable components, and so depending on which button is clicked on, we want to be able to identify which button it is that's been clicked on. So the event will identify that. We'll show you that that is actually a value then that gets passed into our event listener methods. And so using those listener methods, we can detect which buttons have been clicked on, and then what we call handling them, meaning we want to set up some code then that does whatever we want that particular button to do for us within the interface. So a little bit more specifically, when a JButton is clicked, it generates a special event. It's called an action event. So that's the interface that we're going to be implementing into our GUI interface so that we can listen for those types of events. And then for our app to respond to these action events, we have to do 3 things. We have to tell Java that we're prepared to deal with the action event objects. We need to tell the JButton object to notify the app whenever it is clicked. So we'll add the listener to the JButton. And then we need to write the method, which is the block of tasks that we want to handle that particular method. In other words, when you click on button B, what is that going to do within the GUI interface? So we'll take you through those 3 steps now. The first thing that you must do is you must import the event package, so that would be java.awt.event.asterisk. So that would give us all of the events in the event package. And then you need to implement the interface ActionListener. So this is specifically for the JButton. Later on, when we look at mice using the mouse, you'll see that we have a mouse event listener and a mouse motion event listener. So if you look at the code on the right there, you'll see that when we are defining our class, which is named GUI app, and we've extended it to be a JFrame, now we're also adding to it an implementation of an interface named ActionListener. So an interface is just a collection of methods. They have no body to those methods. They're just a collection of method headers. And so what's really being defined here is what action types or action methods will be utilized in order to define what we want to do when a particular event happens, like clicking on one of our buttons. Now, when you implement any interface, in this case our example is the ActionListener interface, you'll get a red squiggly in NetBeans underneath of the interface name. And the reason for that is you need to implement the interface within your code, within the class here, which means you need to create the methods that go along with that specific interface. So again, the interface has declared the methods. There is no body to those methods that the interface declares. So within your program, within your class, you will declare what happens. You will put in the actual tasks that you want to occur for each of the different events that action listener is defining in its interface. So here is an example in step 2 now where you're creating the needed methods. And by the way, when we get to the guided practice videos, I'll show you a trick in NetBeans where you can actually have these methods automatically created for you. So NetBeans will detect the type of interface that you are implementing into your class, and then it gives you a shortcut method for then adding the methods that go along with that. So when you're implementing the interface, we're promising to create those methods that go along with it, and then by putting in your own body, meaning your own statements within those methods, you are then overwriting the methods that were defined in the interface. In the case of an action listener interface, you have to create an action performed method, because the action performed is going to identify for us, if you look in the parentheses there, for the action performed method, there is a parameter that it's accepting which is of type ActionEvent, and then it assigns a name to it of AE. And actually I think it's just E by default. This example is showing it as AE. So what we'll do then is we'll actually use AE then within the body of our method here to determine things like, in the case of the button, what button was actually clicked, and then add other statements from there. Now the third step is we need to attach the action listener to our, in this case, JButtons. So in this particular code here, you can see that we've created a JButton that is named My Button, and it's been added then to the content pane. And there at the very bottom then, we're using the add action listener with the keyword this in the parentheses. So this referring to the actual class where we are implementing the interface. So in this particular example then, my button, when it's clicked on, is going to generate the event that we're going to then handle with the event listeners that we saw in the previous screen. Here we're taking a look at the JTextField class. If you look at the graphic on the left there, you'll see that we've got a window with the title of JTextFields. It has 3 labels on the left and then 3 JTextFields on the right there. In fact, first of all, let's just notice as we go through here, we've extended this to a JFrame, and we're not implementing any events at this point. We're not adding any interface. We're just simply extending our main class to be a JFrame. So this is going back to what you previously have already done. And then using the this get content pane method, we have created a new container called content. Then we are defining 3 new JTextField objects. One is TF name, TF address, and TF amount. So the first text field, the TF name, you'll notice in the parentheses, well actually in all three of them, the parentheses, the value 15 is being passed to it. So that's an integer value which defines the number of columns that that text field will support. So realize that's not how many characters, which if you've done HTML inputs, you know that that value does represent the number of characters that are supported. But this is columns within Java because it's going to vary based on what font face is actually being implemented. So that's important to understand that that's more of a value that is defining the fixed size of the text box, which will vary depending on the size of, as the window gets bigger or window gets smaller, that's going to vary as well. So you're not defining number of characters there. Now in the constructor method for our class is named main, so our constructor is public main. You can see that we're calling a method that we created down below there, which is the create window method. And we just set it up so that we do all the basic window creation tasks there in that method. So you can see it's setting visible to true, setting the size to 300 by 200, the title to JTextField, and then handling the default close operation so that the button will exit our program on close. So then we've got the content.setLayout method where we're passing to it a new grid layout, 3 rows and 2 columns. Now we're going and adding the J label to the content and the J text field for each of those rows. So we've got the label name, we've got the text field F name, that's in the first row. In the second row now we're adding the address label and then the address text field, and then finally the amount label and the amount text field. Then we just go down into the main method, make an instance of our class, so that'll get our code started once we run our program. We're going to take a look now at the declarations for the JText fields, and then we'll take a look too at how we can get the data out of the text field, because remember the user is going to be typing into these text fields, and so we'll need to be able to process that data that they're typing in. So to start with, when we want to get the text from our text field, you can see that we use our text field name, so it's TF name here is the name of the text field, and then we use its get text method, and that is string text, so we assign it then to a string variable. In this case we've called it name. So that's how we get the data out of the text field, and then down below there we're just looking at the constructors that are used to create the JText fields. I mentioned this to you in the last slide there. We're using the second constructor, the one where we passed in the numeric value, but you can just use JTextField and put nothing in the parentheses. That's just going to be an empty text field. It won't be very big. It'll hold maybe a character or two, and you got to realize that text fields do not dynamically expand as far as the user types characters in there. The more characters they type, the text field does not adjust to show those characters. You would use a text area if you wanted to have multiple lines of text. So a JText field is just a single line text object, and based on how wide it initially is set up, that's basically restricting then how many characters you can actually see. So the user may type in 100 characters, but in the case of a JTextField constructor, you'd only see maybe 1 or 2 of those characters. You could click your insertion point in there and scroll left and right to view it, but it's not really the most efficient way of doing that. So when you're defining your JText fields, it's a good idea if you do put in a value, an integer value, that will be approximately how many characters. Again, it's not really representing the number of characters. You got to remember it's the number of columns wide that object is going to display. So you're not guaranteed a certain amount of characters. If you have a very wide font, you're going to get fewer characters being displayed in the JText field as opposed to if you had a very narrow font. But in the last example, you could see, what a size was at value 15 with the integer 15 being used, what that size represented. The third constructor method is to just simply add a string on there, so that would be a default value that displays within the JText field. And in that particular case, the JText field will be sized based on the number of characters in the string. But again, remember that's going to be the fixed size. If somebody types in, if your user types in more characters than that initial string, it's still going to not be displayed completely. You won't be able to view it completely within the text field box. And then the last constructor there, you can do both. You can combine a predefined, pre-populated text value that shows up in the text field, and then also identify an integer, how wide you want it to be. With regards to numeric input, it is important to remember that anything typed into a JTextField is text, meaning it is of string type. So even if the user types in numeric values in there, it's still going to be of string type. It's text. So remember, a string is actually an array of chars, so the text value of 1 would be ASCII 49, and the text value of 2 would be 50. But it is going to be of string type, so even at that point, if you want to get each individual character, you'd still have to convert it to a char. Java has wrapper classes that will help us convert the values that are in our JText fields to numeric values. So in this example, you can see we're creating a string named S1, and that'll be the results then of the tfinput.getText. So tfinput is a JText field, and we're using the getText method to retrieve the value that was typed in by the user in that JText field and assigning it to S1. So in the first example there, you can see that we're just converting it to an int, and it's going to be named input. And then the wrapper class, you can see, is integer with a capital I. So a wrapper class are classes that wrap around the primitives. Because remember, primitives don't have any methods. So the wrapper classes give us the ability to convert values into primitives using methods of a class that has been named specifically for converting the values back to the primitives. So in this case, if we want to convert to an int, we use the integer class, and it's .parseInt method, and then pass to it the string value that we want to have it parse. So any numeric value that's in that string then gets converted to an integer and assigned back, in this case, to our input variable. Now, if we needed to convert to a double, we also have a double wrapper class, and in the second example, you can see that we've got a primitive double type named double, and it's being assigned then the results of running the double class's parseDouble method, and again passing to it the string value of the JText field. Java also has a character class, which can be helpful when you want to get individual characters out of a string value. Getting back to events now, we're looking at mouse events, two different types here. We've got just mouse events, and then we have mouse motion events. So if you want to capture mouse events, you need to implement a mouse listener interface. That means then that we'll need to create the methods that you see there, the event listeners that you see in the bulleted red list at the bottom. So mouse pressed, mouse released, mouse entered, mouse exited, and mouse clicked. So realize that when you do a mouse clicked, that's the combination of a press and a release. But if you just want to track the press down activity of a mouse, you would use mouse pressed, or then the second step, which is when they release the mouse button, you'd use mouse released. So you can actually capture events for both steps of a mouse clicked event. Mouse entered and mouse exited would be used in JTextField. So if they move the mouse into a JTextField, that would be mouse entered, and then when they move the mouse out of the JTextField, that would be mouse exited. So the mouse event then is passed to each of the event methods. The event itself is a variable then that's being passed into these mouse event listeners, and it contains information about the mouse. So if we use the getClicked method, that'll return the number of consecutive mouse clicks. If we use the getButton method, it'll return the mouse button that has changed state. And you can see that constants are used to represent each of the different mouse button states. So mouse button 1, button 2, button 3. 1 is your left mouse button, 2 is your right mouse button, some mice have a button on the side that's button 3. Kind of depends on the mouse configuration, but pretty much you'll have to deal with the left mouse button and the right mouse button. So button 1, button 2, and then also checking to see if no button was pressed, if the mouse moved without a button being pressed. Now we can also return the X and Y position of the mouse when these events occur by using the getX and the getY methods. So X is your horizontal left and right position, and then the Y your vertical up and down position. And those are the most commonly used methods available for mouse events. If you'd like to look up more, you can go to the Oracle Java docs, get that information, and I've hyperlinked that here. You can't use it in the video, but I'll be posting this presentation along with the video, and so you can go through there and click on that link that I have underscored Java docs there. Will take you where you need to go. So here's an example of a mouse clicked event. You can see that we're passing into the mouse click method the actual event, so it's of type mouse event, and then ME is the variable name that we're using to represent the values that are passed in with the event. So if you take a look at the code on the left there, you'll see we've got the public void mouse clicked event, and in there now we're assigning to a J label using its setText method the actual X and Y coordinates of the mouse using the getX and the getY of the ME variable. So just important to realize that that value inside of the mouse click method is the event itself, the value that's being passed into it, and depending on which methods we use, we get different pieces of information. In this case, we're wanting to get the horizontal and vertical location of the mouse, the XY location of the mouse. And you'll notice that the @override is used here. It's not absolutely required, but that'll be generated when you use it in NetBeans. In fact, this is a good example here. I'm going to show you this in the guided practices, that there's a shortcut when we're using the mouse event listener that we can have all these overridden methods generated for us automatically, and then all we have to do is put in how we want to handle each of those different mouse events if they occur. And then the results are showing on the right there. That's the output of the text then being printed inside of the JText label in the J frame. So mouse is at X 182 and Y 198. The second mouse event listener is the Mouse MotionListener. It's a lot simpler interface than the one we just saw, the mouse listener. It only has two different methods. It has the mouse dragged and mouse moved. So mouse dragged occurs when you hold down the left mouse button and drag it across the component. And the mouse event information is implemented the same as the mouse listener. So here's an example of using the Mouse MotionListener. You can see in the very first line there where we've implemented a mouse motion listener. And then in the red boxes where I've highlighted the code there, you can see those are the overrides then of the default methods that come with that interface. So mouse dragged, we're setting the text to "you are a drag," or if mouse is moved, we're setting the text to "not a drag anymore." And so here's the result of doing each. On the left, we held the left mouse button down, moved the mouse, got the text "you are a drag," and then the second example just moved the mouse without pressing any mouse button. "Not a drag anymore" was the results for that method. So in review, we've taken a look at the JButton class and the JButton events, how to implement the Action Listener interface for your JButton events, creating the needed methods, and then assigning the Action Listener to the individual buttons themselves. We also introduced you to the JTextField class, where we can get input from users, having them type into an input box, a text field. Remember, that's only a single line. And we'll use the getText method to be able to get the value out of the text field that they are typing the information in. And then if we need to do further manipulation, especially in the case of numbers, we'll have wrapper classes that can convert that JTextField text for us into numeric values. And then we also looked at mouse events, two types: the mouse listener, which deals mostly with the clicks. It also identifies the position, but mouse motion was just basically whether you're dragging the mouse or just simply moving the mouse. So Mouse Listener, Mouse Motion Listener, and then for the J button, the Action Listener. Remember, those are all interfaces. Those must be implemented into your class to have the ability to actually override the methods that you need for whatever activity is going on in your program. So that's it for Lecture 10. Until next time, happy coding. If you liked this video, please click the like button and leave us a comment down below. I also would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, click the notification bell so that you'll be notified when new videos are posted.